everyone. Thank you. That makes me feel a little bit like I belong. Maybe you can do it a little more energy. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So my name is Karen Taylor. I am the Chief Diversity Officer at Workday. As you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about belonging, but I'm going to tell you about why this work is important to me. So I'm going to start off with that. So I'm the single mother of two beautiful girls. I have a 22-year-old named Sydney who is about to embark on life for the first time and leave the coop. I have a 17-year-old named Raquel who's about to graduate from high school. She was actually the first girl in 30 years to play on her high school varsity football team. So pretty exciting. Part of my tenure of doing this work was actually spent at Cisco Systems. And one of the things that I did was I had an opportunity to travel all around the world. As a matter of fact, I lived in Sydney for 5 years. Sydney was not born in Sydney, but Raquel was actually born in Sydney. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was travel all around the world. And so what I would take note of is how I was being received based on where I was within the world. So I did a lot of travel around Asia. I would be in China as an example, and in China people would stare at me. They'd stare at me. They'd be riding their bikes. They wouldn't fall off. They'd still be staring. I'd be in Japan, and Japan was a completely different story. I'd be walking down the street. You can tell someone is staring at me intently, and they'd get up on me, and they'd walk past me like I was any other Japanese person on the street. I was in Korea once, and literally someone gasped at me. Walked around a corner, and a woman went, "Oh!" Stared at me for about that long, and that time I was like, oh, she must think I'm Whoopi Goldberg. She must think I'm someone really famous, right? I was like, how can she be staring at me like that? But what those experiences did was they really made me think about, how do I think about people beyond the surface of what I'm seeing? Because what they realized is that I was different, right? And they were curious about my difference. Fast forward a few years, and I'm at a sales conference, about a room this big. I'm the only African-American woman. I'm one of 2 black people, and I'm one of about 10 women. And the topic of conversation that day just happened to be diversity. So I was sitting in the front row, steam coming out of my ears, because I'm looking at a typical white executive talk about diversity. And I sat there thinking, how can this guy be talking to me about diversity? So it's really bothering me. I walked up during a break and I said, Mike, look, I'm really sorry I can't receive your message, because I had completely shut him off. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what the conversation was about today. I said, Mike, I really can't receive your message. And he said, why? And I said, because of what you look like. And he said, I'm gay. And it was the first time that unconscious bias really hit me upside the head. But what I really didn't understand about the lesson about that day was until I got home a little bit later. I was sitting on the couch about to eat dinner, and I burst out in tears, because what I realized is that what I had done to Mike, people had been doing to me my entire life. They had simply been judging me by what I looked like. And I, in turn, had started doing it to other people. I share these stories because this is what really shapes the way that I'm going to talk about this topic around belonging and diversity, and how we need to understand the importance of all these words, but really focus on that belonging piece. So what is belonging? So at the end of the day, you can read the slides, but at the end of the day, belonging is about making connections. It's about making sure that you are going to give everything and above and beyond what you have to give for a company, for a community, for your friends, for your family, in a way that makes you feel like you can be there 110% no matter what. You want to give. It's about, how do I take the emotional capital that I have internally, and how do I give that to other people? How do I give that to my company? It's about the connections that we make about other people. That we make with other people. We all have this need to want to feel not just that we belong, but that we're accepted by the communities that we engage with, that we engage in as well. So the interesting thing about belonging, and this is a study that was done by a company called the Kapoor Center, and what they did was they took a look at why were people leaving Silicon Valley? Why were they leaving companies within the tech industry? And what they found is that people were leaving for this notion that they felt like they didn't belong, or they felt like ultimately, like they really just didn't feel like they belonged within the culture of a company. And it's at the tune of $16 billion. This study was done a couple years ago. But just think about this being done just in Silicon Valley, and it costing companies in Silicon Valley $16 billion. Think about that and how this topic is actually impacting the world. And the interesting thing is, it's not just impacting the communities of people that you think that you would think are really being impacted. It's not just about women. It's not just about people of color. This is impacting every single person, every single walk of life, whether or not you're white, you're black, you're Asian, you're gay, you're straight. It doesn't matter. This topic is impacting the social capital of our employees in the workplace, and they are leaving, and it's costing us, frankly, a lot of money. So I'm going to give you 10 tips that I have learned throughout the 15 or so years that I've been doing this work around diversity and inclusion, around what it really takes to evolve from just talking about diversity. So if you think about it, if you go back to the 60s, it used to be about affirmative action. Then we evolved to equal opportunity. Then we evolved to diversity and inclusion. Now we're talking about this thing called DEI. Right? And we're also including this whole notion of belonging, because at the end of the day, belonging is about me. It's about you. It's about the individuals within your institutions, and how are they feeling? Are they giving above and beyond what they can give? So 10 things that I've learned along the way. The first one is leadership involvement and accountability. And you guys all know this one. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but what I will say is that you have to go above and beyond to make sure that your leaders are actually engaged in this conversation. I'm not just talking about you sit around the table, you talk about diversity once a quarter, and then the conversation goes away. I'm talking about holding your leaders accountable, making sure that they understand what's going on within the rest of the organization and how can they play a part. Modeling behaviors. One of the biggest things that your executives can do is talk about diversity and inclusion when they are externally talking about your company. It's also about the business, but when you start to include those words, the employees that you're trying to attract are going to feel much better that you are behind what you're saying when it comes to building a culture of inclusion and a culture of belonging. But if your executives can't talk about it, or if you're talking to an African American person, you have to stumble over the word black, it means that you're not comfortable talking about this topic. So go inside and figure out what it's going to take for you to be comfortable to talk about this, and then start talking about it to other people. Hold your leaders accountable by making sure that they document to your CEO their commitment around building a culture of inclusion. Not just, oh yeah, I'll do it, not just, we'll talk about it every once in a while. Really document and hold your leaders accountable. Number 9, approach diversity through a learning lens, right? We all have a ton of experiences that we can share with other people, but it has to start with curiosity, right? It has to start with questioning, asking questions to other people. It has to start with empathy, okay? We all have different walks of life. If I, as an African American woman, had not traveled to over 25 countries, had not lived in Australia for 5 years, had not traveled and really experienced those experiences of traveling around Asia and the rest of the world, that's what shapes my personal experience, which is different than every other African American woman who could be sitting in this room or in the world. These are my experiences. They have their own. And we have things to learn from them as well, very differently, not just because of the color of our skin and our gender. Allow for stumbles and resets. We have to get past the fact that we're not saying things the right way. I'm afraid to ask the question. I'm going to sit in silence because I don't know what to say when a microaggression happens. You have to allow for people to make sure that we're going to fail at this. This is hard work. We're experiencing things that we haven't experienced in our lifetime before when it comes to dealing with a lot of these topics. And so make sure that you allow for resets and stumbles as well. Make sure you're listening to the perspectives of multiple people, not just the people in your immediate circles. 8, share data. But the important thing about data is it has to be quantitative and qualitative. The stories behind the data tell a much more impactful story than just the data itself, right? And this notion that we can't find the people, we don't know where the people are, we can't hear their voices, that's a misnomer. Okay, the people are out there. There are people of all walks of life that you can experience and engage with that really can help you learn and understand about what you're talking about. But that data has to come with stories. Get it from your employees as well. Okay, they're the ones who are experiencing what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and you have to listen to their voices. We do something that we call Best Workday Survey. And we have a series of 34 questions that we survey we survey our employees every Friday with two questions, just two questions. But what this allows us to do is a couple things. It allows us to keep a pulse on the experiences that our employees are having. It allows us to know whether or not employees or different pockets of employees are having different experiences. And it allows us to put data in the hands of our managers, who are the people who can really impact the experience of our employees. So part of that means that we send out this information on a regular basis, and we curate data to say, if you are not creating what we call a remarkable experience, which is a 4 or 5 experience, here's what you can do to actually impact that for the people that work for you. And we do that through something called our Best Workday Survey. In addition to that, we have a belonging index. We take 6 questions from those 34 questions, and we created a belonging index. This is really where we've been able to uncover some issues, because it goes beyond just looking at whether or not we're just talking about just the numbers on the surface. We can then dig down and say, are my women or are my African Americans or Asians having a different experience than the rest of their colleagues? And if they are, then it allows us to actually do something with that data. So we can curate data to say, hey, now you can actually do something with this. You've got to be able to share the data. I know a lot of times our legal departments are saying, no, you can't share that data. But the truth of the matter is, find ways to work with your legal department to make sure that you can share the data. Because if you don't share the data, nothing's going to happen about the issues that are actually happening within your workforce. Ensure everyone is aligned. So we have one corporate strategy. It's called VIBE. I'll talk about that in a few slides. But create one strategy that everyone can actually connect to globally. Okay? What we do is we have our strategy called VIBE, but what we also do is allow for that functional and that regional difference so that people can actually react to the strategy pertaining to where they live to. So as an example, if I'm going to Dublin, Ireland, I'm probably not talking to them about increasing their workforce with people of color, right? Because they just don't have a lot of people of color there. We may touch on it a little bit. But I will be talking to my leaders here in the United States about that. I won't be talking to my engineering leaders about increasing their workforce of men, but I'm certainly going to be talking to my HR leader and my marketing leader about that, who have an overabundance of women. So you have to make sure that that flexibility is there, but that one notion of how we vibe and how we vibe together stays true for the entire company. So a single approach probably won't work. You have to allow for that flexibility. But once you look at it collectively, then the progress will certainly be much more impactful. Number 6, words matter. You can't start this journey and think that you throw the words diversity, inclusion, representation, belonging. You can't throw these words out and not define them for people, because what then happens is that people create their own definitions of the words, and those definitions are different, and we're not on the same page in terms of what it is we're trying to accomplish. You have to define the words, because the words are really important. If I don't know the difference between diversity and representation, how do I know what I'm actually working towards? So you really have to define the words because they do matter to people. This is my favorite one. Talk about the hard shit. Okay, yeah, and I'll tell you why. It's the hard shit that... It's the hard shit that actually is going to help us to make more progress. So if you really want to build a culture of inclusion and belonging where your organization can thrive, you have to talk about the things that are impacting the mind share of your employees. And I guarantee you, Everything on this list, your employees are thinking about. They're talking about it at the water cooler. They're talking about it in the bathroom. They may or may not be talking about it to you as a leader because you may not have created that culture where people feel safe to actually speak up and be authentic about what they're actually experiencing. But if you don't talk about the hard shit, absolutely nothing is going to happen. You have to talk about privilege. You have to talk about race. You have to talk about politics. If no one is thinking about talking about politics this year in your companies and trying to figure out how your employees are going to navigate those conversations, you are way behind the game. This conversation, you should have been thinking about this last year or even the year before, because employees are going to be talking about it regardless of what side of the spectrum that they're on. They will be talking about it, and it will be impacting the mind share that they're actually bringing to work. It will impact their productivity. So talk about the things that really matter to your employees. Make it fun. After you talk about the hard shit, make it fun. It's really hard to step into this topic sometimes because it's hard to talk about it. And a lot of times it is uncomfortable. Certainly when you're talking about the hard stuff, it's super uncomfortable. But if you can find a creative way to get your employees engaged and participating, it will make it a lot easier. Making sure that every single employee in your corporation is accountable for your culture of belonging and inclusion is the way that it has to be. This can't be the job of just your diversity department, can't just be the job of your CEOs. All of us are responsible for creating the culture that is going to enable every single one of us to thrive within our workplace. This is something that we called that we did last year, and it's called Vibe Week. Vibe Week was about getting as many employees as we could to help participate in building a culture of inclusion. So we did a lot of things. We had external speakers. We talked about privilege and power. We did something called Workday Talks. But at the end of the day, we thought we were doing these events, and what really came of it were the enormous connections that people made. I'll give you two quick examples. We had these things called Workday Talks. Any employee could come in for 15 minutes, talk about something that was on their mind, take 5 minutes of questions, and we would move on to the next person. We had one young lady who wanted to talk about the title of her talk was, I refuse to apologize for my special needs child anymore. So she got up and she talked about the fact that she would be in a restaurant and she'd say, oh, I'm really sorry about my son. Oh, I'm really sorry. Oh, I'm really sorry because of his special needs behavior. One day he walked up to her and he said, Mom, are you embarrassed of me? And it broke her heart. And so her title was, I will never apologize for my special needs child. What happened though was that there were 100 people in the audience who were also parents of special needs children. So allowing them to start to have that dialogue and those connections was extremely powerful, and we just thought we were gonna have these Workday Talks, right? Another one is if you look at the picture in the center with the girl with the arm at the bottom, we were actually building prosthetic hands for people in need. And afterwards, one of our colleagues walked up to me and she said, Karen, you have no idea what this means to people who can't afford prosthetics. I have a nephew who is 7 years old, and at 6, he lost 3 of his 4 limbs. That was a connection. She approached me just bawling because the fact that we were actually doing something that was so important to her. This is what creating a culture and making sure that people can participate actually means. Get everyone involved. So you have to, as I said, it can't just be the work of your diversity department, it can't just be, your executives. Find a way, just like we did through Vibe Week, to make sure that all of your employees have an opportunity to participate. To celebrate. You have to celebrate both the big and the small wins. This is tough work, right? It takes courage for someone to stand up to someone else who has just said a microaggression to someone else in a meeting, okay? That takes courage, okay? We've got to be able to make sure that we are celebrating the people who are stepping up, the managers who are actually allowing their employees to work on employee resource groups, our leaders who actually are being executive sponsors or who sit on our councils. We've got to reward people for that, and we have to outwardly reward them so that they can see that this is a culture for all of us where we want everyone to belong. And lastly, VIBE. VIBE stands for Value, Inclusion, Belonging, and Equity for all. It's important for me to put that for all on the end of that every single time I say it. And the reason is because I can't step in as our company's chief diversity officer and talk about inclusion and belonging and then say, oh, I'm not talking about everybody in my workforce. I'm only talking about women and people of color. That's the first way that you could actually make someone feel like they actually don't belong. And so make sure that the efforts that you do are really about everyone. I say that and I only show this slide because it talks about the number of ways in which we've shown up as a great place to work company. So whether or not it's for millennials or parents or women or diversity, if you focus on the for all, it will come back to you in great ways. And for us, part of what we've been able to do is really build this culture and really prove that we're doing a great job around making sure that it's for everyone within our culture. And so lastly, I leave you with this question of how will you vibe? And I'll just ask to run a quick little video before I end.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex.